All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Russ Felkin. I'm with Butte County Office of Education and the K-12 High-Speed Network. And with me today, I have Rachel White. So we both will be presenting the beginner's E-rate training. We'll go through the whole process of filing your Form 470, all the elements to deal with prior to doing your application, as well as some of the aspects that you need to get ready for when doing the second step of your Form 471. So we'll go ahead and get started. And if there's anyone that's on, please make sure that you're muted. Thank you. So the first section we'd like to cover with you is going to be kind of an overlook of the E-rate modernization. After this, we have a few more. We have approximately 9 sections. We'll basically talk to you about establishing your discounts, eligible services, the new Category 2 budget, as well as the Form 470 bidding process, and then we'll give you a demonstration online for the Form 470. And then the last few sections we'll talk about program compliance, and then an overview for the Form 471, and anything that's new with the California Teleconnect Fund, known as CTF. But first, let's talk about the modernization, a new look for E-rate. Kind of the precursor to that, I want to remind everyone that the role of the California Department of Ed and the State Library is to be more of, I guess, a focus group for you in the sense that we give you the best practices. There's a team of others that are combined with myself and Rachel. We both have someone from the library as well as a few E-rate consultants in the state as well as some applicants. And what we're trying to do is take all of the information, both historical as well as current information on the E-rate process and application, and kind of put it into a presentation and some training and outreach that we do throughout the fall and the winter. But specifically, I just remind you that we don't have any statutory authority over the E-rate program. And again, what we're presenting to you is just best practices. Anytime you're making a specific decision on your E-rate process, that we encourage you to refer to both the USAC and the SEC websites, as well as you can use their question and answer system for specific issues that you may have. Specifically, this is one of the most recent information that the Commissioner Wheeler proposed a $1.5 billion increase to the cap. So now that E-rate will have a total budget of $3.9 billion. This was voted on December 11th and passed. So that's one of the good news that has happened with the program, that we now have an E-rate that's will continue to be adjusted for inflation, as well as has been increased to probably reflect what the demand for the program will be moving forward with a 21st century classroom. And the new Form 470 is now available. Just a reminder, and I'm glad you guys are joining us because the window will open on January 14th. It doesn't mean that you couldn't start your Form 470 today, last month, or back in August, as early as August. It just means if you did your Form 470 28 days ago, you could do your 471 on January 14th. But then you have to be reminded that your last day to file 471 is March 26th. And please, I encourage you every year, don't do extreme E-rate and wait till the last day, because their system, especially this year, they're doing significant system upgrades and changes to the forms, as well as the technical aspect of their servers. So there'll probably be some last-minute challenges they have. So the filing window will be open for a total of 72 days. So for those of you that haven't done your Form 470, if you again want to do last-minute or extreme E-rate, you could go all the way up to February 26th. But again, we're encouraging you to post your Form 470 sometime during the month of January. Of course, the sooner the better. So on slide 6, I kind of alluded to, this is an outline of what we'll be covering for today. And we have about 9 sections. And then slide 8, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the highlights of the changes to the program. One of the goals of the E-rate program, E-rate 2.0, is closing the Wi-Fi gap. So you'll see when we go into Category 2 and what's eligible, it's specifically focused on trying to have a 21st century classroom with wireless capabilities. We're also trying to simplify the administration of the E-rate program with purchasing contracts and discount calculations. And later on, we'll give you some examples for those school sites or districts that have a lower end demand for internet access, that they can skip some of the steps and just go directly to the 471. But it's a minor amount of annual internet access service charges for you to qualify for that. As well as Rachel will go through the discount calculations, because there has been some changes to the urban-rural classification. One other thing, too, that we'll go into some more details, are invoicing and then document retention. They have made some changes on the amount of time that we have to keep our documents moving forward. So here's closing the Wi-Fi gap, one of the main goals of the program on E-rate 2.0, that for the next 2 years, they specifically set aside $1 billion for funding year 15 and $1 billion for funding year 16. So those for Category 2 specifically. If Category 2 demands exceed funding availability, prioritization will be based on discounts. One thing you can see here also that the Category 2 discount rate, the highest will be 85%. Historically, that's been 90%. And for the next 2 years, they'll put the 2 and 5 on hold, so that if you've had that issue in the past where maybe you applied for internal connections 2 years and you had to wait another 3 years, basically this coming application year as well as the following, that rule will not apply. And then each site and library will have a specified budget, and we'll specifically go through this in more detail in slides 54 through 67. So there is some exciting changes that should, when we get done painting the picture, we have to, at the end of today, you'll see why that there has been some changes in eligible services, and why, as we go through the program, and also myself, Rachel and I have been listening to a lot of the FCC announcements as well as USAC, but they feel like they'll have enough funding for Category 2, and that'll be based upon some of the aspects of what's eligible, as well as some of the budgets that school sites and libraries will have available for them. Multi-year contracts. One thing that they streamlined application process availability starting in 2016 for multi-year contracts. So if your first year of your multi-year contract, and again, they're encouraging you to have ideally a 3 or 5 year, but or less. They kind of discourage anything going beyond the 5 year. And I think as far as our best practices, we encourage you to either do a 3 or 5 year term. Also, there's an extent of any changes in the request to services within the scope of the original Form 470 and the multi-year contract. You'll have the availability or the ability to go ahead and make changes in your 471 on the level of funding that you need. So more specifically what this is referring to, if you do the correct language in your Form 470 and you ask for certain bandwidth, and when we go over that later, it'll be a little bit clearer, you can ask for up to 1 gig, and let's say the first year of your contract you only need 100 megs. If you put the correct language both in your Form 470 and in your contract, you'll be able to, in your second year of your Form 471, increase the bandwidth. It'll also help you with the new rules, streamlining the PIA process. And on slide 11, some of the aspects of a simple, faster, more efficient, and I was referring to earlier, was that the Form 470 not required for internet access if the speed is at least 100 megs down and 10 megs up, and costs no more than $3,600 a year prior to the E-rate discounts. Service and price are commercially available, and cost may not be averaged between buildings. So this is one example of trying to be more efficient and cost effective. Another one is no longer technology plans are required for E-rate. However, I think as a best practice is we would highly encourage you to continue with the tech plan, especially as like in last year's example where you had Common Core funding, and I know that your boards will want to know what exactly your strategy is and what you're planning to do with your technology funds. And we still encourage you to look at building a technology plan, and as well as there's a link on slide 12 to a tech plan builder both the Department of Ed and LA County Office of Ed have worked very hard on developing for you. So it's a great tool, and again, we encourage you, even though you don't need it for E-rate purposes, for you to go to continue to do a technology plan. Also may be required if your district's going out for some kind of technology bond. Slide 13, again, we'll go into more detail, but what they've done is, in this revamping in the new E-rate program, realize that the urban-rural classification needs to reflect the more recent 2010 census data. So now determined for entire school district or library system is no longer individual schools or school sites. Specifically, if there's more than 50% of school sites must be rural for the district to be considered and classified as rural and receive that discount on the discount matrix. And non-instructional facilities do not get an urban-rural status. I know this is a little bit challenging because one of the nuances with its new classification, there is what they call urban clusters and rural clusters. So we had specifically, I know in my part of the state there's an area, the Corning area, where that was historically rural, but what they've done with the new classification, they consider it to be an urban cluster because there's a certain proximity of smaller towns when in a certain distance. But as we go further into some more detail in slide 26 through 33, you'll have a better idea of whether this is going to affect your application. Another area is schools must have at least is community eligibility program. This is something that's becoming, I guess, more of a predominant choice that we have in certain parts of the country. Specifically, we haven't seen much of this in California, but however, schools that want to qualify for the community eligibility must have at least 40% of their students directly certified for CP. School pools must apply a national multiplier directly to certification population, determine the NSLP discount population, as well as schools are capped at 100% for the discount. So this is one of those new highlights of the changes, but we'll go into more specific details about this on slides 35 through 37, as well as overall calculating your discounts. Again, discount surveys, this has been something that you've been doing in the past. Surveys continue to be valid, so you can no longer extrapolate the survey data, which was something you historically could do. Again, we'll cover this in more detail in later slides. Again, this is something that we've had along in our past trainings. We talked about document retention, but specifically now they're saying that 10 years from the last date you receive a service, you must keep your documentation. Documents must be retained in electronic format or paper and must be disclosed upon request. So you can see in this particular example, the contract begins on July 1st of 2015 and it ends on 2018. So you'd have to keep that documentation until 2028. So significant in terms of your document retention. I think some are looking at it as just kind of a lifetime in terms of keeping that documentation for E-rate purposes. So at this point, before I turn it over to Rachel, I just kind of want to, we've kind of gone through the highlights of the changes to the program. And one thing I want to remind us, I know it's going to be a little bit challenging when we talk about some phase-down aspects of voice and other areas, but the program was established for any internet access in the 1997 Telecom Act, and I think when they did reestablish the E-rate 2.0, they're just trying to keep in the spirit of the E-rate, which was internet access, and ensure that the 21st century classroom has plenty of funds for both internet access as well as Wi-Fi. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel so we can discuss establishing your discount.
One of the big changes that come out of E-rate modernization is how the discounts are derived. On slide 18, it kind of gives us an overview of the things we'll be talking about regarding discounts. So instead of reviewing each one of these now, let's just get right into it. The new discount principles as a whole, we're looking at the fact that organizations will have one discount percentage. There will no longer be a discount for each site. Libraries will get their discount percentage from the NSLP eligibility of the district in which the main outlet is located. Consortia will continue to use the simple average of its members in order to establish its discount. And as Russ briefly mentioned earlier, the urban-rural status still affects your discount, but it's going to be on a district-wide or a library system-wide basis. Slide 20 gives us what the new discount matrix looks like. You'll notice we now have two columns, one for Category 1, the second for Category 2. And as Russ mentioned earlier, Category 2's highest discount is now an 85%. But that same level in Category 1 gives you a 90% discount. And these are the basic only changes to the discount matrix itself. It's still based on what your literal percentage of students qualifying for the free and reduced lunch program is. Now, the simplified school district calculations. As mentioned earlier, there is only one discount per district or library system. We'll show you what this looks like on a future slide. And then it's all based on what the average is of your urban or rural status. In order to be considered rural, you would need to have more than 50% of your sites classified as rural. And this is sites that do not include your non-instructional facilities. Independent schools would calculate their own information. If they're not part of a district, they would use their own enrollment, student population, and determine their urban-rural status based on their own physical address. Now, in California, one of the best methods to establish your discount percentage is using your CalPAD section 1.17. That is already a report that goes to the state, so it's already verified by a third party. Another option that you can use is your monthly claim for reimbursement report from food services. But either one of those, whichever you choose to use, document which one it is so that if you're asked for it later in PIA, you can easily produce it. Library systems is a little bit of change in how they calculate their discounts. They're based off of the NSLP eligibility of the school district in which the main outlet is located. It says that they can no longer calculate the district or the discount based on all of the districts where the library system has outlets, so it's only the main branch. Now, the urban-rural status is based on each library outlet. So in this example, you could actually end up with a library that has a different discount than its district where it resides. As previously mentioned, non-instructional facilities will not get an urban-rural status. And on slide 26, we talk about consortia. They'll calculate their discount based on the average, the simple average of all their members. Now, consortium can have multiple applications that feature subsets of members. For example, if you have a consortium that is spans across the state, you may have areas where, let's say, they don't get service from a particular provider, so you wouldn't want to include those members in an FRN that states that provider. So in those cases, the FLD is allowing consortia to have subsets on their application, so they could have multiple applications. But having said that, whoever they put on the application for discount purposes would have to be recipients of the services listed on the application as well. On slide 27, we've mentioned this a couple of times, how the urban-rural classification has changed to be reflecting the 2010 census data. It was time for it to be updated, and as most of you would realize, with growth, we will have less rural areas than we did back in 2000, which is what the urban-rural classification was based on previous. In updating this, they've also changed how we're applying this to our discounts, and we'll show you how that looks on a slide ahead about the majority of your sites having a classification of either urban or rural. One nice new feature of E-Rate 2.0 is that USAC has developed a lookup tool so that you can simply enter your entity number, and it should give you a result back of saying that you're either an urban site or a rural site. You can enter all of your entities and check what your district is as a whole. We have on slide 28 provided you the link to that lookup tool, and in future trainings we'll give you specific demonstrations of how that looks. If you happen to be looking up your entities now and you come across errors, please call the Client Service Bureau to try to correct those errors so that it won't affect your application. Typically, we found that the errors can simply be a misspelled word, like a street name, or there's a dot or a period at the end of words like drive or avenue. Those will cause confusion in the system, and it will give you an invalid response in return. And here's an example of if we look at a school district that has 3 sites. We have the red school, blue school, and yellow school. 2 of those sites are urban, so that means the entire district is urban. If we take this slide 29 and apply it to the discount matrix, we notice that this site qualifies for a 50% discount on the discount matrix in the urban section. That would be both in Category 1 and Category 2. But if we took a library system that was located in that same area, remember that library system is going to use the NSLP eligibility of the school district in which the branch is located. So using the example previously of the school district, we would determine what the enrollment would be applied to the library. But the library would then use its urban or rural status for each of its individual outlets. In a case where we have libraries that have more rural outlets, they could potentially end up with a rural discount where that main district had an urban discount. In this example, the library did end up with a rural discount, giving it a 60% discount, 10% bump over the school district. Now, other methods of calculating your discount. Surveys. Surveys continue to be valid. This would be for those sites who perhaps don't participate in the National School Lunch Program, charter schools perhaps, private schools. You can still use your surveys, but it's going to be a direct one-to-one ratio rather than extrapolating the data. And because of that, you can now use the NSLP application as a survey instrument if you choose to do so. So slide 34 gives us an example of how you would calculate your survey results. Let's just look at Red Elementary. If it has 300 students enrolled, you would send the survey out to all 300 students. Let's say you get 125 returned, and of those 125, 100 of them qualify for the NSLP program. If we did that for each school site in this district, we notice that we end up having 870 students qualified for the NSLP program based off the surveys that were returned. That provides us a 47% discount, or 47% of our students who qualify for the program. Once we apply that to the discount matrix, then we would see exactly where that would land. 47% would give us a 60% discount if we were urban and a 70% discount if we were rural. So moving forward back to slide 35, another alternative discount mechanism, the Community Eligibility Program. As Russ mentioned, this is new to California. Your food service department and business services would most readily know if you actually qualify for this program. It's based off how many students are directly certified. So if you have at least 40% of them that are direct certified, then you would qualify for the Community Eligibility Program. Doesn't mean you have to use it, but you qualify for it. Now what happens for these districts is qualifying for this program then means that all of your students get to participate in the National School Lunch Program at no charge. But that doesn't necessarily apply to E-rate. E-rate still says that you have to come up with a number of your students that actually qualify for the program. So based on the rules of the Community Eligibility Program, you would use a multiplier of 1.6 against the percentage of students that qualify that are direct cert students. The example on slide 36 tells us that Yellow School has 1,000 students enrolled and 50% of them are direct certified. So you take that multiplier of 1.6 times 500 and you come out with 800. So now you have 800 students that, according to the program, would qualify for the NSLP program, giving you an 80% discount. I'll correct that statement. It gives you actually a 90% discount because 80% of your students qualified. That brings us to the end of the discount calculations. We encourage you that if you have any questions, we will be taking questions a little bit later. If you can save them, we'll go through each one of the chat questions as we get an opportunity.
Okay, just a little bit of adjustment because I'm worried that we might get too far down the road, but is there any questions to this point? And then we'll take a break either after the eligible services and for more questions. So I'm just checking right now to see if there's any questions on the chat, and later on we'll go through and actually open up the phone bridge. But for now, for the first few sections, we'll just do chat questions. So we're monitoring it. Anything, go ahead and send out your question. So the question is where the PowerPoint is at K12HSN.org, and over on the left-hand side is where you'll see E-rate and CTF, and that's where we keep this PowerPoint. Okay. We'll wait just one more second. If there's no more questions, then we'll continue on with eligible services. All right, so we're on slide 38, eligible services. So what we have on slide 39 is kind of an overview. It says at the top, eligible services list. So we have kind of category 1 and category 2. For those that have been around E-rate, it used to be called priority 1 and priority 2. So the focus of category 1 is broadband and voice services. Eliminated services will be, as we'll see in a few slides, where they phase down the VoIP over time. And then on category 2, there's some elimination of some eligible items that we've had historically, which specifically servers is an example, and as well as phone system. And we also will go into the eligible services, lit and dark fiber, on slide 58. We'll go into that in more detail. And then we'll talk about pricing transparency as well as bundling up an order. So on slide 40, eligible services, the focus now moving forward is support of broadband, and as I just mentioned, the phase down of the voice services. And we'll give you an example of a particular district where we'll show that happening over a 3 to 4 year period. And they eliminate the outdated legacy services and other former priority 1 types of services over time. 41 gives you kind of a nice overview of what the eligible data transmission services and internet access. So we have all these different alphabet soup, so to speak, of different types of broadband services. You have cable modems, frame relay. ASE is another terminology that they use specifically for AT&T, and I know Verizon has some of theirs, as well as other carriers, Comcast, Kinesis, Charter. There's all a whole slew of different telecom providers across the state. So slide 41 kind of gives you an overview of those different broadband services that are E-rate eligible. Here is the area that will be phased down and subject to phase down. Specifically, it's VoIP and also voice services. Centrex, an example, interconnected VoIP, POTS, wireless services including cellular voice, excluding data and text messaging, and we'll see an example of that later where you might be able to use that still. These services are subject to a 20% funding reduction beginning in year 2015. We call these the flash cut on slide 43 specifically, those that are not eligible starting this coming application year. Paging, directory services, inside wiring maintenance, web hosting, and voicemail and email. So that's the areas that starting this application year will not be able to apply for discounts on. Data plans and air cards, I mentioned this a second ago. The support is limited to those cases where individual data plans are most cost-effective option for providing internal broadband access to portable mobile devices. Specifically, I'll give you an example, is if you have a school campus, and let's say you're putting some portable classrooms out there that may only be there for a few years, and the cost of getting fiber optics out there because the distance is past 333 feet, could be surmountable. It could be $25,000 to $50,000 potentially. It's just an example. And so you look at a Wi-Fi. Some of those 5-person type of connection points under Wi-Fi are $40 a month. Then in this case, where it's more cost-effective to use Wi-Fi, when you go through PIA, they would ask you to show that. So you need to show them a cabling quote for to do this, and then versus doing some kind of Wi-Fi over the period of time that those portables will be out there. So that's an example for slide 44. Funding is considered not cost-effective when users can already access the internet through internal wireless broadband. Specifically, if you already have a wireless access system, a WAP system, and then you try to also apply for a data plan, that's basically not cost-effective, as well as can be looked at as maybe duplicative services. Exceptions may include, like I gave you the portable classroom here, on the, or the classroom that are portables out back in some of the school campuses. Is also library bills, and where they have also where a small number of students or patrons. Here you can see an example of eligible services. So you have over here the long distance. Oops, sorry, back one slide. And you have your telecom, your cellular, and your WAN and your web hosting. You can see all of these have a total of discount of 82%. And the funding for this particular example is $101,262. And then if we break this out as a phase down, you can see that they used to be at the 82%. And then this coming year, they're going to be at 60, year 2016-17 at 40% discount, 17, 18 at 20%, and then finally on year 2018-19, they will have no discount. So that's slide 46. So specifically, this shows the phase down of the VoIP services, and also the fact that web hosting is no longer eligible after this funding year. Eligible internal connections. I kind of summarize it. It's basically your cabling infrastructure, the switches, PoE switches, and then the wireless access points to enable this. So basically local area network connectivity. So cabling, caching services, network switches, racks, UPSs, firewalls, and routers. Improvements and upgrades in software necessity to support eligible broadband internal connection components. So that would be like an example, iOS upgrades for your routers and to maintain those switches. On slide 48, pretty long list here, no longer eligible. Storage devices, servers, video over IP, VoIP system components, interfaces and gateways. 49, managed internal broadband services, Wi-Fi services. Basically, they're talking about your local area network subject to Category 2 budget, and we'll see that in a few minutes. So you'll have this budget to be able to work with one-time purchases as well as ongoing maintenance. Services are provided by a third-party, operational management, and also the equipment providing patches and OS upgrades. That can be part of your Category 2 budget. So on slide 50, eligibility limitations, it's only supporting the equipment listed as eligible under a broadband and internal connection. So let's say you have a server you purchased off of E-Rate 3 years ago. You would not be able to use your Category 2 budget to support that server moving forward. Upfront charges are part of our contract are also eligible. Any ineligible internal connection components, content filtering must be cost allocated out. Basic maintenance of internal connections, again, I already mentioned it's subject to the Category 2 budget, and then a second here we'll see an example of that, and I can give you an idea of some strategies you may be able to use with that Category 2 budget. But for support of basic maintenance, such as repair and upkeep of your hardware, the switches, the wireless access points, basic tech support, iOS upgrades, configuration changes. Again, but that's all going to be subject to your Category 2 budget. Basic maintenance that does not include services that maintain ineligible products or equipment, like I mentioned a second ago, with servers, workstations, those types of things. Upfront estimates that cover the full cost of every piece of equipment, services that enhance the utility of the equipment, network management, on-site tech support, and unbundled warranties. Miscellaneous eligible charges are taxes, shipping, training. Training is related to the installation and configuration of the equipment, not like professional development training. So for example, if a bunch of PoE switches get installed when the vendor was covered under either your own funding or through the E-Rate procurement process to do the installation, they can show you how that piece of equipment operates and how to maintain it, but not professional development for teachers or even IT staff in general professional development, but it has to be specific to the equipment that was installed and for the aspects of maintaining it. Here's another one that's leased and lit and dark fiber. There were no changes in the monetization or impacting the eligibility of lit and dark fiber for this coming application year. The IRU is treated as a lease and may be subject to amortization rules. Rerouting the fiber is considered a special construction charge and not maintenance. And you're not able to warehouse dark fiber. So what they mean, don't have a bunch of strands pulled between your school sites and just have them sitting there not being used. So here's a matrix I think that does a very good job of kind of outlining leased and dark fiber eligibility. And specifically for those that are maybe new to E-Rate and not familiar with the technology, what this slide 55 is talking about, basically the option of using leased or lit fiber or dark fiber to connect your school sites. So you can read through this matrix. The installation within property for building to building is not eligible as this Category 1. So basically that would have been an internal connection. So that's clearly not eligible. Item number 2, under both leased and lit fiber services, both dark and lit, installation on the property, special construction for leased lit fiber is eligible, with dark it's not. and then monthly services for both of them. As you can see, the maintenance and service provider provisioning of the electronics is eligible for the least lit, but not for the dark. The bundling order, this is again relative to slide 56 to some of the changes on May 23rd of 2014, the order effective for this funding year 2015. Applicants must cost allocate non-ancillary components, but not limited to use such as VoIP handsets, computers, cell phones, tablets, and those things. So in the past, I think that there's been people that have applied prior to this order where they could show that an applicant was applying for some kind of service where if I just came in and walked in off the street for a cell service, they included a phone for free. And then also, as an applicant, you're posting a Form 470. The vendors were responding saying, look, we do this for our average customer, so we're going to do this for you. And that included some examples for VoIP services. Well, basically, this order was to stop any more confusion. I've even seen it where they had like data plans where they included the tablets. So this order states basically that that's not something that you can do anymore. So that's slide 56 is a good reference point for you. So at this point, we'll just pause for a split second, and then I'll turn it over to Rachel where we talk more about this Category 2 budget. So we'll look for question and answers real quick. Okay, so we're going to now go into Category 2 budget.
As Russ is going through the eligible services section, you've probably heard him mention several times Category 2 budget. This is a brand new approach to what used to be Priority 2. Slide 58 gives us an outline of the questions we're going to look at as we learn what Category 2 budgets are all about, starting with, what are Category 2 budgets? In short, it's how much money you have to spend at each site over a 5-year period for internal connections or Category 2 products and services. If you happen to be implementing a project that exceeds your budget, you just have to know that whatever's in excess will not be covered under E-rate discounts. So our next question will be, well, which entities have a Category 2 budget? Is it all of my entities? Actually, it's only your school sites or your library outlets and branches. Your non-instructional facilities do not receive a Category 2 budget. It's only those facilities that have students. So if you have a non-instructional facility with classrooms, those students are going to be considered part of the budget of their home school. And that's how you would look at why non-instructional facilities do not have their own budget. Students have a home school somewhere, and that's where those students would be counted. Now, and you'll notice in red here, it says schools, school districts and library systems may not average their cost across multiple school or library budgets, but each budget is specific to that school site or that library site or branch. Slide 61 asks the question, how much is my budget? Well, the pre-discount amount for a school is based off your enrollment and $150 per student with a minimum of $9,200. That's for those smaller school districts with fewer than 62 students. They'll get at least $9,200. For libraries, it's based off your square footage, and that's $2.30 per square foot with a minimum, again, of $9,200. Slide 62 gives us an example of how you can look at your budget. Because remember, we said this budget has to last you for 5 years. So if we look at Site 1 with an enrollment of 5,000 students, it gives you a pre-discount budget of $750,000. If this site happens to be an 85% discount, then E-rate will provide $637,500 of that total budget. If you chose to spread this over all 5 years, let's say you chose to do a service, a wireless management service, rather than purchasing equipment, then you're looking at $127,500 per year for that school site. And then we drop down to site 4. Again, 100 students there, $15,000 pre-discount, and you can just run the math across for each school site. And this is how you look at your budget. You can choose to use it all at once, or you can spread it over the 5-year period. For libraries, as mentioned on slide 63, it's square footage based. So again, looking at site 4 there, 5,000 square feet, $11,500 is their pre-discount budget. I want to emphasize that it's pre-discount budget. You then have to apply your discount percentage to that site to figure out how much E-rate will support of your project. Well, can your budget change from year to year? Yes, it can, in short. So let's say in 2015, you actually expend monies against that budget. Then obviously in 2016, it would be decreased by that much. But on the flip side, it could go up in 2016 if your student count or square footage goes up. So yes, from year to year, your budget can change. Well, what about for existing schools? If your student count decreases in 2016 as opposed to what it was in 2015, well, at that point, you would not be required to pay back the funds from 2015 that exceeded what your total budget was for 2016. 2015 was based on an actual student count, same as 2016, and in that way, it can fluctuate. For new schools, you don't exactly know what your enrollment is yet, but you have projects that you have to pay attention to, so you can estimate what your student population is going to be. Now, let's say that you overestimate. In that case, you would be required to pay back the difference to USAC had you received the funds. If you underestimate, then your budget is actually larger than what you anticipated. What's the time period that my budget covers? Well, we mentioned that it's a 5-year time period, and it begins in your first year of receiving that Category 2 funding. Now, slide 67 mentions the 2 and 5 rule versus the 5-year budget. And this slide was up to date up until December 11th, when the FCC went to vote again on some additional changes. Initially, the FCC had dedicated $1 billion per year for funding years 2015 and 2016 to Category 2. And what that meant was if they didn't make a decision after funding year 2016 to keep this program in place, then it would revert back to the 2 and 5 rule. Well, on December 11th, the FCC voted to earmark that $1 billion for Category 2 for all 5 years of this budget. So now we get to look at this program, this Category 2 budget approach for 5 years, and at the end of that time period, then the FCC will review the program and see if it's effective and see if there needs to be any more changes. So with having said that, it's to everyone's to your advantage to go ahead and apply for Category 2 so that the FCC has all the data they need in order to determine how effective this program is. Or if it needs to be tweaked, eliminated, changed, they'll have the best data available to them if everyone is able to apply for it. Rather than having this void of, well, we all stopped applying because we're only at the 60% level. The FCC has made comments that they feel optimistic in being able to fund very low on the Category 2 side. Of course, no one can make promises, but the optimism is definitely there. So how are services counted against your budget? In much the same way as they were for Priority 2 of the old E-rate, the same as it is for Category 2 of the new E-rate. If you actually list an entity on your Form 471 for a particular funding request number, and you receive those funds, you make the purchase, you do the project, you receive those funds from USAC, then that budget is counted, or that expense is counted against that school site's budget. Now, we are told that the new Form 471 online will have the ability to split an FRM between multiple entities, so you can have one dollar amount that's shared between multiple entities, and based on the percentage that you provide on the application is how much will be applied to each site's budget. Let's say, though, that you get funded, but you end up canceling a project, you don't use it the way you intended, you can actually return the funds to USAC by filing the Form 500, and at that point, that expense would not be counted against your budget. But that's only if you have not received those funds. Now, we have an example of what this whole budget looks like for a district. We went site by site earlier, but for a district-wide application, notice this one, as a whole, the district has $509,400. That E-rate could cover for them on their budget. But notice the district office has no budget at all. That's because it's a non-instructional facility, and that's really what we want to highlight here. But then the question might come up, how do you cost allocate for shared services? This affects the district office, but it also affects other school sites if you have a course switch that serves multiple sites, for example. How do you cost allocate for that? Well, a couple of different options you have. There's a straight line method where each entity shares the cost equally. You have a proportional method, which is based on student count or square footage, and then you can specify how much is to be shared by each site, and that's something that you would determine. It's very flexible, but you have to be able to prove it should you be asked. Before I go into the strategy, something I also want to share is when this equipment perhaps is located at the district office, and it also serves the district office along with school sites. What we're being directed is that the percentage that is serving the district office would have to be cost allocated out, since that it's not eligible. District office, non-instructional facilities are not eligible for Category 2. However, for how much of that equipment is serving all of the school sites, that would be eligible and would be assigned to each site respectively. Now, because your Category 2 budget is based on student enrollment, something we want to bring to your attention is that the order states that you can use part-time students in establishing your budget. So it brings up a few questions. Well, what are part-time students, and how do you document that? Well, part-time students would be those such as vocational ed student who attends one class on a different campus. Well, that different campus gets to count that student in their budget as well as that student's home campus. So in this instance, students can be counted twice as long as they're actually attending classes on multiple campuses. This does not affect your discount percentage. So I want to make sure that that's a separate thought. It does not affect your discount percentage. It only affects the budget for Category 2. Now, when it comes to documenting this, however you choose to do it, document how you came up with that number. It should resemble your secondary enrollments in CalPADS, and that's a field in the CalPADS program that is not required. But for the purposes of E-rate, we encourage that you populate that field. It'll make auditing and the PIA review process a bit easier. But again, since this is new, we want to encourage you to look at using part-time students, but just be aware that proving it to the PIA reviewer, we don't know what challenges that's going to present because it's new. So that's why we encourage you, whatever you choose to do, document it well. This brings us to the end of the Category 2 budget section.
Okay, at this point, I wanted to make sure we didn't have any questions. So if you could post something in the question and answer. Okay, the first question we have, does a Category 2 budget start in the 2015-16 year, or is this something that already exists? I'm 100% new to the E-rate program. A good question. Yes, it does start in the new application year, which is funding that starts on July 1st of 2015.
The Category 2 budget is brand new to E-rate, so it's as new to E-rate as you are.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We'll go ahead and go through the Form 470 and bidding process then. Okay, so we're on slide 72. Slide 73 has a good graphics, the application process. The Form 470 and the bidding process, it kind of flows you through. So first of all, I mean, this in past trainings, and if you're new to E-Rate, it's a team effort. When you go to do E-Rate, it can take your IT person, your ed tech person, your procurement manager, your CBO, your IT director. It's kind of, in smaller districts, you know, that's probably 1 or 2 people. In larger districts, that could be a half a dozen. So that's one of the assumptions at this point is when you're beginning the process, you've, one, examined the contracts that have expirations and what services you need to apply for, as well as you pull together the appropriate players that I just mentioned to figure out what you'll be needing to post your Form 470 for. So the first bullet point indicates the service categories, as I was just mentioning, that you're posting for, and it must be posted for a minimum of 28 days. Ensure that it's a fair and open document communication. So you can't just if you're going to make one vendor aware of your posting, you need to make sure that you do a fair and open to all vendors that may be particularly interested in your E-Rate posting and your bidding process. After a minimum of 28 days, I'd say go 29 days just to be sure. Use an evaluation matrix of price as the heaviest weight factor. In fact, I cannot emphasize that point enough. I was on a call yesterday where someone knew quite a bit about E-Rate, but on their pointing grid, they had 5 categories at 20 points each, and when they received an audit, price didn't have the highest point range, so each of them had 20. They needed to have price be 21 points, and one of the other ones 19, and the other, I guess it would be 3, would be 20. So unfortunately, under an audit, they potentially have to pay back those funds. And so it is a serious issue in terms of having price as the highest weight. And then the last bullet point, once you wait 29 days, work with a selected vendor to build the new online item 21. Basically, it's an outline of the cost of the services you'll be receiving with that application, and be filed before the deadline that we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So a summary of an overview of the form, and again, we'll actually go through a Camtasia video that will show you, it takes about 15 minutes of how to apply for E-Rate. Indicates the service and categories of service, the 28-day window, meaning 29, indicate that you're planning to have issued an RFP or other documents regarding the procurement process, and indicating special requirements, and you'll see this in the Form 470 when we go online. Indicates who receiving the services. So you have to say district-wide. There'll be actual field on the Form 470 if you're new to it. And 2 new exemptions for the Form 470 filing are effective starting in 2015, and we'll go into more details when we go online and look at the 470. How frequently must I submit a Form 470? Applicants must file a new Form 470 each funding year for requests for tariff, month-to-month, or new contract services. But existing services that were previously bid in a prior year that resulted in a multi-year contract with voluntary extensions may not need to file Form 470. I'd like to also remind you that we talked about having a contract term that was either 3 or 5, but not to exceed 5 years. And the purpose of the form is kind of like an announcement to vendors. It begins a competitive bidding process, but it's an announcement, hey, here's the services that I need a quote for. So you'll see when we go through the Form 470, it's kind of a communication tool to let the vendors be aware of what kind of services and scope of services you're looking for. Specifically, we have Category 1, telecommunications, and then we also have, in terms of the scope of how many school sites, library systems, as well as notifying the bidders of types and qualities of services. And we encourage you when we go through the Form 470 that you may think you only need 100 meg at your school sites, and if you're in a multi-year contract, if you structure the Form 470 as well as the contracts correctly, meaning I would like up to 1 gig per school site. Doesn't mean you have to put in a gig in the first year, but it gives the E-Rate process the ability for you to upgrade to that 1 gig maybe in the 2nd or the 3rd year. Again, the Form 470 must specifically state that, as well as you must have language in your contract to allow you to do that. It'll save you time in the long run so you don't have to go out to bid to get higher bandwidth in future years. Where do I need to find the form? And this is a hyperlink here. It's basically at usac.org/SL. But when you go offline and look at this PowerPoint, you'll see that it takes you to the USAC website. And tips, determining what new services you will need to add next year. Specifically, what we're trying to tell you is to look at the eligible services list every year. Just don't assume you know if you've been doing it in the past that you don't realize that there might be some changes, just like we've seen with the phase down of WAEP, or there might be some new services in future years. And again, I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you know what contracts expire prior to June 30th of 2016, so you know that you post that on your Form 470. In instructional facilities, USAC assigns unique identified numbers, so basically each site will have its own entity number. And this is for individual schools, libraries, and bookmobiles, and you can see the definition of an entity number and what that looks like at the bottom of the link there on slide 78. Here's what they call non-instructional facilities, or NIFs, administrative buildings, bus barns, cafeteria facilities, and I've even heard the word Cocoa Shack. I guess that's buildings out by your football field in some parts of the country. And libraries are administrative buildings, bookmobile, library technology centers. And so there's, at the bottom of slide 79, there's actually a link to more in-depth entities. Submit and certify. So once you submitted the Form 470, you must certify it. You don't have to do that immediately. I'd encourage you to do it the same day, but for some reason, if you're not able to do it that day, you can do it all the way up to the 28th day, but I would encourage you not to wait that long. So what you can do, if you don't have a PIN number, because example, someone asked a question earlier, said this is their first year, and if they're going to be signing the Form 470, then they would have to do a paper certification of the last page. You complete the entire Form 470, and when you get to the last screen, you'll be able to do a print certification. Once you print the Form 470, make sure you know the allowable contract date that actually was showed on the first page of the Form 470. And do not award a contract before that 28th day. In the case, I would say make it the 29th day. And again, we just reemphasize on slide 81 what the allowable contract date is. And you can tell why we put such a high emphasis. I've seen statistics that nationally 5% of the applicants don't wait the proper 28 days. So that would be sad for you to go through all this work and then not wait at least a minimum of 28 days. That's why I emphasize to wait 29 days. If an RFP is issued with in conjunction with the Form 470, whichever document is posted last determines the actual ACB. So this is an important fact. So let's say you're doing some Category 2. You post your Form 470 tomorrow, but there's just a Form 470 saying that there's a mandatory walkthrough next Wednesday. So, and at the walkthrough next Wednesday, you hand out a packet that shows cabling drops, some technical specifications, or maybe it's switch information. The 28 days does not start tomorrow when you post the Form 470. The 28 days start next Wednesday when you give the information, complete information to the vendors that give them the ability to respond to your request. So again, that's an important factor. So I would actually go 29 days after next Wednesday for this particular example. On slide 82, competitive bidding, all services including month-to-month and those under expiring and new contracts must be competitively bid to receive E-rate funding, no exceptions. And this definition, and we'll see with the Form 470, this is the USAC FCC's definition is posting a Form 470. That's what they mean by competitive bidding. Must follow all state, local, and E-rate bidding rules. But familiar with your procurement policies. Because your district may have some more specific requirements for bidding, some elements that when you go to do the 29 days, some boards want to see all contracts before they're submitted. Under an E-rate audit, if that was your board policy and you went and submitted it under your 471 without taking it in front of the board, under an audit they would say you didn't follow your local procurement rules. So that would be an example why you need to be very comfortable and familiar with not only the E-rate rules, the state, as well as your local districts. And in medium to larger districts, you probably might have a procurement officer. You definitely want your CBO or assistant SUP involved with it. One thing, just kind of taking a step back, when we talk about posting the Form 470, who should sign it? The 471, when we go into that training in following days, we'll go into more detail, but specifically the Form 470, it can be an IT director. I'd probably encourage you to be at least some kind of level of a manager that would sign and be the signature authority on the 470. On the 471, it's even more critical that you have an assistant SUP or a superintendent. But the Form 470, you can be kind of more of a manager and person that oversees the technology in some shape or form, or your procurement. Typically, it's usually an IT director or a CBO or business manager. So the FCC bidding requirements, all processes must be fair and open on slide 83. Again, we must post it for a minimum 28 days. And on the 470, when we go through, you'll see that you must be describing the services in an RFP is not necessarily required. One thing that we'll point out later, but is on bullet point number 2, if you hand anything out to vendors, that's considered to be an RFP under the eyes of the FCC and USAC rules. So when we get to that field and we're doing the Form 470 online, make sure you ask questions, because there is a box that if you hand out anything, an example, let's say you have 4 school sites and you have addresses in what they call an A and a Z location. If you don't put that in your Form 470 and you later on get a question, where exact are these locations, and you email that out to various vendors, that's considered an RFP under the eyes of the FCC, USAC, under the E-rate rules. Applicants cannot list a trade name for goods or services without allowing for equivalence. An example of that is, let's say you're asking for some Cisco 3550 switches, and you must say on that same posting or that request that or equivalent. You can say, however, that the manufacturer must ensure interoperability with existing network equipment of Cisco 3550s. However, you must say that other options are available, like HP, any type of other type of manufacturers. Disqualification factors must be listed on the Form 470 RFP. The price of the eligible services and goods must be given the most highest weight. And contracts must be signed and executed before filing the Form 471. So if let's say you did your 470 like 30 days ago, you couldn't do your 471 on the 15th of January and then sign the contract on the 16th. So that's what they're referring to at the last bullet point. Again, in general, California and state laws are more restrictive than FCC rules, although exceptions occur when the FCC rules prevail. So we have here on the left-hand side, you can see all of the state rules. Procurements under the bid threshold of $84,000 don't require formal bidding. May use master contracts or piggybacking, and may sole source a bid to district standard and certain procurements. As you can see on the opposite side, all procurements require competitive bidding. So the FCC rule is more stricter in the first example there of $84,000, and then may use state master contracts. All procurements require competitive bidding, so the FCC rule in this case on the second line is more restrictive. So that kind of, you get the idea. There's your flow down there, that you must follow the more strict rule. And then here at the last bullet point, we see that you must post in the newspaper 2 times in a 2-week period. I'd encourage you not to overlook that point. If you have any type of RFP like electronics, a large wide area network, a cabling, please do make sure you put it in the newspaper twice in a 2-week period, because you'll be surprised once you get your quotes back, it'll exceed the $84,000 fairly quickly. So it's better to be safe than sorry on that. You wouldn't have to restart your steps. Slide 85, bid evaluation acronyms and terms. So we kind of already alluded to that. A bid is a service provider response to your Form 470. Price is the primary factor in evaluating it. I'd also encourage you to have your criteria defined ahead of time. So when you're issuing out your Form 470, if you have a specific RFP, that you put on there what your bidding criteria evaluation would be. So on slide 86, applicants must ensure that they post for the correct category of service. So talking about the Form 470, you cannot provide just a generic description, and I mentioned that earlier when we give you an example of a Form 470. You can't just say, give me all eligible telecom services. You must say specifically you're looking for, 100 meg to 1 gig, and then for district-wide, all school sites, something along those lines that's a little more specific, but again, we'll go online and show you that. And just don't provide a laundry list of the eligible services listed on your Form 470. And note, I already mentioned this, the RFPs are not required by E-rate program, may be required by your local competing, disclosed more in the competitive bidding section. But again, specifically, we have seen in the past where E-rate has done audits and we provided AZ locations and some other details that I felt like the RFP box should have been checked. Slide 87, you cannot list specific makes or models. That's that or equivalent that we alluded to earlier. So thought without allowing equivalent products or services to bid. So you cannot do that. So you can't just say XYZ manufacturer's router number. You must say XYZ manufacturer's router number or equivalent. And applicants may set some eligible service requirements. Applicants may require service providers to provide services that are compatible with the kind of system that they have in place. So I kind of mentioned that earlier. So you say or equivalent, but vendor must ensure that the product that they recommend is compatible with my existing infrastructure of manufacturer XYZ. Bid or disqualification criteria must be spelled out in the Form 470 or RFP. So on that last bullet point, that kind of gets to my point earlier, where if you have your vendor criteria clearly stated on your Form 470/RFP, and also any disqualification factors. So you probably might want to put both if you have those. But definitely you want at least your evaluation criteria. So at this point, we'll pause for a minute before I turn it over to Rachel and see if there's any questions. Okay, we'll go on to the next section.
We're going to look at state master contracts and how they affect the bidding process. Now, state master contracts can come in multiple flavors. You can have a single winner, multiple winners, or you can have a multiple award schedule. The one that we're specifically going to look at today is the CalNet 3 contract, that being probably the most well-known state master contract that you would likely deal with. We provided the Form 470 number that the state posted in order to line this bidding process up with the E-rate process. So if you choose to use this Form 470 number, you can know that a bidding process was done and that the state managed the evaluation of that bidding process. These contracts were awarded on November 15th, 2013, yet you can choose to join the contract when it's convenient for your district. Most of you have probably already joined it, but there could be those out there who have not yet chosen to do so. Just know that it is open to you at any time. The CalNet 3 contract covers 6 subcategories. So this would be a case of a multiple award schedule. Here's on slide 91. We have a list of all of the service providers who are involved in the CalNet 3 contract. AT&T, CenturyLink, Integra, Jive, NWN, and Verizon. Slide 92 gives us some very specific details of who was awarded what. We won't go through each one of these, but as you can see, some of these categories have multiple winners, such as subcategory 1.2. It's MPLS, virtual private networking, converged voice over IP, and that would be it for subcategory 1.2. But notice it has AT&T, Integra, Jive, NWN, and Verizon. So when there's multiple winners to any given category, how do you handle that when it comes to E-rate? Well, E-rate requires that you do what's called a mini bid process. Now, note, if you're using the state's Form 470, you're not going to post another Form 470. You're just simply going to compare these service providers against each other within that contract. The prices are published, so you can compare those prices and do they actually deliver service to your area. Those are things that you'd want to consider when doing your mini bid process. Once you've documented that process, then you're able to sign your authorization to order, which is at that point, basically, you're signing onto the contract that you want to participate in the CalNet 3 contract. Now, let's say you do choose to post your own Form 470 rather than using the state's Form 470. You have that option as well. At that point, you can use CalNet 3 as a bid response. Just know that even in doing that, you'll still have to do the mini bid process within that contract should you choose to go in that direction, using your own Form 470. One note that we want to bring to your attention is regarding CalNet 3 and voice over IP. This has to do with the way a piece of legislature is in place that dictates how the contract that the state is allowed to put together has to look. And in a nutshell, anyone using the VoIP services off of CalNet 3, you have to have at least one MPLS line delivered to each location receiving VoIP services. We bring that to your attention because knowing this may not make this the most cost-effective solution for you. You may choose to go out and bid for VoIP services separately from CalNet 3. We just want to bring that to your attention because it's not the norm. It's actually a little out of norm for this type of service. However, it is a requirement of the CalNet 3 contract. So now that we've looked at how CalNet 3 fits into the bidding process in the Form 470, we're just going to basically review the Form 470 real quickly, what the bidding process is. Choosing a service provider after you've gone through your bidding process, past your allowable contract date, which again is that minimum of 28 days. Now you can evaluate the bids received. You can choose your service provider, sign a contract, take it to the board if needed, and then at the end of all of that, post your Form 471. E-rate is a timeline-driven program. So if any of this is out of order, anything listed here on slide 95, E-rate will catch it. And then you'll have to prove what exactly was your order of doing things. And if it's out of order, you may actually lose funding because of it. Your evaluation criteria, as mentioned before, price has to be the heaviest weighted factor. USAC has actually provided us a sample of what an evaluation criteria or evaluation matrix could look like. They don't tell us what your factors have to be, except for price being the heaviest weighted. On slide 96, there's a link to constructing an evaluation. That takes you straight to the SLD's website. But we've also provided a sample on slide 97. What I'd like to point out to you on slide 97 is looking at the vendors here, vendor 1, 2, and 3. You'll notice that the cheapest vendor was actually vendor 2, but that doesn't mean that the cheapest vendor was the winning. This is where the most cost-effective comes in because of the other criteria that you had predetermined were important to your district and to your needs. Now, the other criteria listed here can be flexible. Like I said, USAC does not tell us what to evaluate the bids on other than price being the heaviest weighted factor. The rest of this is based on your needs, your location, your community. And then just a few reminders again, the competitive bidding process has to be fair, open, competitive. We'll talk a little bit later about how USAC looks at this to determine if it's fair. Are you receiving gifts from a service provider who then ends up winning the bid? Those are little things you have to keep in mind that at the time of bidding and even before and after, you have to keep specific distances from service providers so that it doesn't look like you're changing the bidding process or providing anyone with insider information. Of course, you are looking for the most cost-effective solution. You're receiving government funds in order to provide that internet access to your students, and in order to make all the funds go furthest, you want the most cost-effective solution. Keeping all of your records, and when we say all, it's already in caps there, underline, bold, italicize, all records. Correspondence with vendors, potential vendors, winning and losing bids, any worksheets that you have where you evaluated the bids. What is your evaluation criteria? The resulting contract, the signature, the board agenda should be taken to board. I can't stress enough that if it's involved in the bidding process and E-rate at all, you need to keep that documentation, especially now that the documentation requirements are 10 years from the last date of service. That means that you can be audited up to 10 years ago. Of course, that is a new rule that going into effect for the 2015-16 year. But keeping that in mind, going into the 2015-16 year, please pay special attention to documenting your process. And slide 99, again, reminders that we've already discussed. So your roadmap to success is basically start early, allow plenty of time for mistakes to happen. If you end up having to repost a Form 470 due to an error, make sure you've allowed enough time for that. Or if you don't receive enough bids back, or if you receive no bid, know what your options are so that you don't end up losing out on funding. Now, once your Form 470 is submitted, you're actually going to receive an acknowledgement letter from the SLD. Please pay attention to this letter. It does provide you the opportunity to make minor corrections should they need to be made. The letter actually stipulates what corrections are available to you. If you find that you have an error that is not correctable, you will have to post a new Form 470 in order to correct that error. Once you post a new Form 470, then that means your 28-day bidding period starts all over again. And as any of you know, if you've got an RFP related to that, and if you've already run ads in the newspaper, it can get quite complicated if you have to repost a Form 470.
Okay, at this point, we're going to pause for any additional questions. And then we'll take, I think, a 10-minute break and allow you to stretch your legs, do a bio break. But when you come back, we'll actually run an online, show you the form online. So it's actually a video that you can go and see at any time. But we'll go through it. It'll take about 10 to 15 minutes. So the first question we have here, so the process has to all be completed prior to March 26th, the deadline for the Form 471. So yes, you have to do the Form 470, wait 29 days, take it in front of your board if you need to do it. You know, all those steps we talked about in terms of the evaluation matrix, et cetera, and then take it to your board and get approval if that's what's needed and file your Form 471 all prior to March 26th. So you have a little over 72 days to do that. Okay, welcome back. At this point, we're going to go ahead and play the Form 470 video that you all have access to anytime. It's on the K-12 HSN website. So we'll go ahead and play that. Just also, too, I think there's one person that's not on mute, so double check your phones and computers, et cetera, and make sure you're on mute. So at this point, we'll go ahead and play the video that shows you how to do a Form 470 online.
Hello, and welcome to our online demonstration of the online Form 470. This demonstration will take you through the basic steps of completing this form. Let's begin by going to the Schools and Libraries website. The web address is www.usbc.org/SL. You will notice on the left side of your screen, under Resources and Tools, is a link that says Apply Online. We will click here to take us to the page that shows all of the forms that are available for online use. Since we are focusing on the Form 470, we will click on the link that says Create Form 470. Now let's begin. We will first be asked to identify who this application belongs to, who is the entity filing it. Since we know the entity number, we will enter that now. And click Next. The next screen allows us to confirm that we have entered the correct number. If so, click Next. You will now see a pop-up on your screen reminding you to verify the information in Block 1 is correct. If you find anything that is not correct, you can call the Client Services Bureau to make that correction. If you want this correction to appear on your form, you should stop at this point, call the Client Services Bureau, make the correction, and then begin a new form. In order for the pop-up to go away, you simply click OK. Since everything in Block 1 for our applicant is correct, we will simply choose to close the pop-up screen and continue on. The first item we will enter is called the Applicant Form Identifier. This field is meant to help you in tracking your own form. There is no standard format to use in this field. For purposes of training, we're going to identify this as a test form. We will next select the funding year. You'll notice there's only one option here, so you're guaranteed to get this information correct. Select funding year 2015. Now we will move on to Section 5A. This section is asking us to identify the type of applicant. Since we are filing on behalf of the County Office of Education, we would select School District, since that most accurately identifies the sort of applicant we have. Now we will move on to item 5B. Item 5B wants to know within our entity, what are the types of sites we have? For our applicant, we will select public and charter, since we have both types. Item 5C is asking for the total number of sites eligible to receive services from this posting of the Form 470. Since we have determined that the services we are posting on this Form 470 will be available agency-wide, we need to include all of our sites. This includes our non-instructional facilities such as the County Office of Education and a maintenance shop. We will enter 20 to cover our existing sites and the expected growth of 2 additional sites. Now moving on to item 6, the contact person. This contact person is the one that will receive communications from the Schools and Libraries Division about this application. This does not have to be the same as the authorized signer, but preferably someone who has easy access to email and has the ability to quickly forward any communications received from the Schools and Libraries Division to the correct person. You'll notice the copy for AC, A through C above, to 6, B through D below. This is a nice feature if the contact information, such as the address and phone number, are the same on the top of the screen as you would have them to be for the contact person. Now we'll move on to item 6E, the email address. We suggest that you have your preferred method of contact be your email address. That way you can document your communications with the Schools and Libraries Division and any prospective service provider through email. You will be required to enter your email address twice to confirm that it is accurate. Item 7 is for consultants. If you happen to be using a consultant for your E-rate filing, their registration number would be entered here in item 7. If you are working with a consultant, they will know what this information is and would perhaps be preparing this form on your behalf or provide this information for you to fill into your form. We will now click Next, which is where you receive the very important information of your application number. It's important that you print this page or save it. You will need this application number in order to access your application later, should you choose to exit the system before you submit your application. After clicking Next, we are now ready to start entering our services for which we are seeking bids. Through our planning process, we have determined that we will be applying for eligible items in the Internet Access and/or Telecommunications category, as well as the Internal Connections and Managed Internal Broadband Services category. So we will select both of those boxes and click Next. This brings us to the first screen where we will enter the details of the services we are going out to bid on. Since our applicant has decided not to use an RFP, we will select item 8B, indicating no RFP, for our Internet Access and/or Telecommunications services. Notice the statement underneath item B, which says, whether you check yes or no, you must list below the Internet Access and/or Telecommunications services you seek. Specify each service or function, for example, voice service, monthly Internet Access service, and quantity and/or capacity. Our applicant is seeking a voice over IP system for all of its sites. So under the column for service, we will enter voice and tab over to quantity and/or capacity. We are going to enter that 20 sites, and in parentheses, we'll put district-wide. 20 sites will need voice system with a minimum of 30 users at each site. We will now go to our next service, which is our wide area network. Since we're seeking high-speed data lines, we will enter that here. We are again seeking this service for all 20 sites with a minimum of 100 megabits per second. Now, all of our other services, our local and long-distance service, as well as our cellular service, are already in an existing contract, so we do not need to go out to bid for those services. We'll now click Next and enter the information for our Category 2 services, our internal connections and managed internal broadband services. Now, in this one, we do have an RFP, and our contact person will be responsible for sending those out. So on item 10A, we will select the radio button there, and then right underneath that, select the checkbox next to the contact person in item 6. This will notify all service providers who to contact in order to receive a copy of the RFP. We have determined that we are in need of a wireless local area network for 6 of our locations. So we'll enter WLAN under the service or function, and under quantity or capacity, we'll enter 6 sites. Now that we have adequately described what we are going out to bid for, we can move on by clicking Next. We are now looking at item 12. Item 12 gives us the opportunity to list an additional person who may be better qualified to discuss the technical aspects of the bidding process and RFP. If this person is different than the person in item 6, then you would enter their information here. Item 13 deals with restrictions imposed on the bidding process. Since you are in the state of California, you have at minimum the public contract code that provides restrictions on the bidding process. So we encourage you to confer with the procurement team to identify what, if any, you will list here. You will also need to be aware of your own board policies that may affect your bidding process. Our applicant has chosen to notify prospective bidders of their desire for flexible terms in the contract. Now that we have entered this information, we will click Next and move forward. This brings us to the end of the section for describing the services we are seeking bids on. This part of the form allows for an opportunity to add a section if you realize that you forgot something. Since we have already identified everything we planned on, we will simply click Next. We are now looking at Block 4, listing recipients of services. Item 15. This section is designed to identify who will be paying the bills directly to the service provider. Since our County Office of Education pays the bills on behalf of all of our sites, we will enter only one entity number. And then click Search. You will notice that Butte County Office of Ed appeared under the listing section List. We will highlight that name by clicking it, and then click the link that says Add, which moves the name Butte County Office of Education under the Billed Entities list. We'll scroll to the bottom of the page and click Next. Now we have the opportunity to confirm that we did indeed select the correct agency that will be paying the bills directly to the service provider. Click Next. This brings us to the end of the form, where the certifications are required in order to complete the form. To summarize these certifications, we'll run through them rather quickly. Item 16, if you are a school, select option A. If you're a library, select option B. Item 17 was removed from the form, so there is nothing to do there. Item 18 reminds you that you must wait at least 28 days prior to selecting a winning bidder, and that you must equally consider all the bids you receive. Item 19 reminds you of the 10-year document retention requirement of the program. Item 20 states that you are not allowed to profit from the services in which the E-Rate program provides discounts. Item 21 reminds you that there are other investments apart from E-Rate that you must make in order to retain E-Rate discounted services. These could include computers, training, software, electrical capacity, and so on. Scrolling down a bit further, item 22 certifies that the signer is authorized to pursue these services on behalf of the applicant. Item 23 reminds you that it's your responsibility to be aware of the applicable FCC, state, and local bidding requirements, and that it is your responsibility to follow them. And item 24 reminds you that you can be suspended or debarred from the program if you are convicted of criminal violations or held civilly liable for knowingly abusing the program. We will now enter the information for our signer. Notice in item 27B, there's an option to check here if the consultant in item 7 is the authorized person. This would be something that you would have agreed upon with your consultant prior to having this form created. And finally, item 27G asks for you to name the authorized person's employer. We have now come to the end of our form. By clicking that, you will receive a page that allows you to do a print preview. We recommend that you do this in order to print your form, review all of the information on your form, verify that it's accurate before actually submitting your form. Once you have verified that everything is accurate, you can simply submit your form, certify your form, and you have begun your bidding process. Congratulations, you have completed your Form 470.
All right, go ahead and we'll wait a few minutes here for some questions. And again, that video is available online, so you can go back and watch it at any given point. Okay, well, we're going to go on to the next sections. We're on slide 103, program compliance. So we'll go through this, and then at the very end of today, if for some reason those prefer to ask their questions through the phone, then we'll go ahead and open up the phone bridge. But right now, we're taking questions via chat or question and answer. There should be those features on your webinar. So we're on slide 104. Just a reminder, some of this stuff is repetitive from the process that we discussed of starting off on the Form 470, but we just want to make sure that these slides are taken from the USAC slide deck. So a lot of these slides, even during their presentation, are repetitious. So what we've learned over the years that that means that there's going to be special attention, so to speak, by PIA, Program Integrity Assurance, which is the auditing side of the E-rate process. So kind of just bear with us if it seems like it's repetitive. It's just because we really want to emphasize some of that information. So on slide 104, it must be fair and open. And the applicant, consultant, and the service provider, so these are like examples of conflicts of interest to avoid, and applicant and being a service provider. So that's just one thing. If a service provider offers to help you out with your application process, the 470, and it's anything beyond just providing you the quote for your item 21, then definitely stay away from that. Open competition and bidding evaluation. You want to make sure that you're open and fair about all of it, as well as all the local and state rules we mentioned earlier. And then read the FCC Form 470 responses and contract the fine print. Both the elements that Rachel just went over in that video for the signature part of the 470, as well as the contracts. I have seen in past years, this has been a while, but under Category 2, where you go through a bidding process and then the vendors, you sign a contract with them for cabling, and it isn't clear to the vendor that if you don't get funded that you're not going to follow through with it. And I have seen some situations where some districts had to really work very hard to tell the vendor, look, I didn't get my E-rate funding, so therefore I can't follow through with this contract. So make sure your language specifies that. Again, we still encourage everyone to go for Category 2. That wasn't the point of that example. It was just to give you an idea of what you need to look at in terms of your contract language and fine print. The Form 470, only applicants can determine the type of services you need. Again, this is just more about being separated from conflict of interest with the vendor. Prepare and fill out the Form 470 yourself, run competitive bidding, and negotiate with the prospective vendors. Applicants cannot have a relationship with a service provider, have ownership and interest in the service provider's company. Service providers giving them inside information, violate applicants' own ethical regulation policy, so your district policy or your library policy, and receive gifts or donations from service providers that violate FCC rules or seek circumvent FCC rules. And that gifting and rule, there's some slides that we have on our website. That was a big emphasis a couple of years ago, and it has to do, I used to joke and say you can't take any more than 4 of the $5 foot longs, so it had to do with having a maximum of $20 for lunch and $50 annually per vendor for gifts for lunches. And I think just a good rule of thumb, just stay away from those situations, taking gifts, as well as even going out to lunch. I think it just sometimes leads to perception issues and can cause you problems. Slide 107, applicants and service providers cannot have pre-bidding discussions. So this is a challenging because you maybe don't know exactly what you need to apply for, and you're kind of wanting to see what vendors have to offer. So applicants can have a pre-bidding discussion of new product offers, technical teach applicants about their new technologies and present product demonstrations. And I already mentioned the de minimis items that you can receive. I would say just a word of caution on slide 107, especially now this is an open window Form 470, you want to be careful about that interaction with that vendor. It would have been ideal if you would have done it earlier in the cycle, in the fall time period, of any interactions with the vendor as far as getting to understanding the product line. So be very cautious if you start to do that now, that it doesn't look like you're biased. It may just be better for you to post the Form 470, and at the end of the 28 days, on the 29th day, you can then go back and openly and fairly ask questions of each vendor and conduct some kind of information gathering in that shape or form. Request for proposals, SC3 rules refer to RFPs generically, but they may have a variety of names: RFQs, RFPs, summary of project, instruction to bidders. FCC rules do not require RFPs, but state and local procurement rules may. And I already mentioned earlier, and this is referring to if you hand out any information, then you need to check that box that Rachel's video reviewed for have an RFP, which means you have additional information that you'll hand out to vendors. And it must be available to vendors at least 28 days. And earlier I mentioned an example, if you have a 470 posted today, the catering walkthrough isn't until the end of next week. The vendors don't have all of the information until the walkthrough, so therefore the 28 days / what I call 29 days doesn't start until after the end of the walkthrough when they have all the appropriate information to bid. So this is an example on slide 108 where RFP posted and it talks about the same kind of thing, and then December 15th starts the 28th day because that's when they have all the pertinent information to give you your quote. And then on 109, you must ensure that the competitive bidding process is open and fair. You must keep all incoming bids in correspondence with bidders, respond to all vendors. If you choose not to, have a good reason, spam or document it. And all potential bidders must have access to the information. One thing I encourage you when you do your Form 470 is maybe have a generic email address that's E-rate at whatever your district email address is, like erate@mydistrict.org. And what that'll do is that'll allow for others, not just yourself, to be in the focal point for either USAC communications or vendors, and then you can keep track of it. So that's one thing, if you have, especially like when you have an E-rate walkthrough, you want to make sure all the vendors sign in, and then you send back out responses to any questions to all vendors. And that erate@mydistrict.org kind of helps to facilitate good communication and as well as document communication that's been going in and out, both relative to Form 470 posting for online questions, as well as if you have a physical walkthrough. It helps you to be able to communicate effectively and keep track of that. Slide 110, applicants must have a signed contract or other legally binding agreement prior to submitting the 471. We mentioned that earlier. Signed contract is probably the best evidence of that constitutes that. And a verbal offer or acceptance will not be legal. And tariff for month-to-month service purchase under Category 1 contract is considered a contract service. So on that particular case, month-to-month, you don't necessarily need to have a contract because it's just going to be a month-to-month service for that Category 1. Purchase orders must be considered a contract or legal binding agreement. And on slide 111, voluntary contract extensions are allowable only when the option is stated originally provisions. And I mentioned that earlier in our presentation today, where you want to specify that up front on your Form 470, as well as any RFP that the district could choose or the library could choose to have 2 one-year voluntary extensions if you're asking for like a 3-year term. But again, don't go past, even with extensions, past the 5-year term is the best practices. Slide 112, we already talked about state master contracts. and competitively bid and put in place by state government. And again, it must be a state agency and considered a state master contract. In our case, there was multiple winners in the state awards to several bidders, so that means you'd have to do a mini bid if you're going to use the state master contract and cite the state Form 470. And also multiple award schedule, state awards for the same products and goods, multiple vendors. So that's kind of repetitive in terms of multiple winners, and then the multiple award schedule. That's very much in line to what we have with CalNet 3. A bid evaluation, retain all vendor selection documentation for at least a 10-year period. So we talked about when you receive your bids, keeping all that documentation, that selection process for 10 years after the last date of receipt of service. That also includes losing bid information, the evaluation matrix, and anything relative to the selection process, including the emails, communication, et cetera. Price of the eligible goods and services must be the primary factor. We completely emphasize that today, so hopefully that no one will have any issues with that. And then, of course, it's the most heavily weighted overall option in your evaluation matrix. And wait 29 days, last bullet point on slide 113. Here's some examples for you that might be helpful. So if you're, especially your first year of E-rate, examples of rule violations. Applicant has a relationship with the service side or will be unfairly influenced. Someone other than the applicant or the authorized representative of the applicant prepares, signs, and submits the 470s. So somehow, again, a service provider or someone else gets involved that's related to a service provider and taints the Form 470 process. Some additional examples on slide 115. A service provider representative is listed on the 470, and the Form 470 doesn't describe desired products sufficiently. And we gave you examples earlier. Document retention, again, we emphasized this a lot earlier today. In terms of 10 years, and documents may retain electronic or paper. Documents to retain, this is more of kind of a laundry list of those things we discussed earlier. Contracts, copies of all bids, both winning and losing, proof of delivery of the service. So then I would encourage you, once you have the service, let's say you apply, you get funded next fall, you retain the copies of the invoices for the products. And I think under current, at least for school districts, I'm not sure about libraries, there's also GASB 34 where you have to retain and track your assets. So following all of those good practices and keeping the documentation in place. Slide 118, these are some don'ts. Don't allow potential service providers involved with it, and don't wait until the last minute to do your Form 471. So we definitely encourage you to do your Form 470 this month as soon as possible, and that way you won't miss any of the deadlines. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Rachel for the kind of the overview, because at this point, you should have a good sense and a good picture of how to fill out the Form 470, everything that you need to do to this point. And now we'll stop quickly for any questions, because what we're going to be doing now, the last two sections of today, is basically taking you to kind of like an overview of what you're going to be doing after the Form 470, meaning on the 29th day, as well as the state discount for telecommunications called California Teleconnect Fund, or CTF. But before we do that, because we're switching gears a little bit, we want to pause for a minute for any questions on both the chat or the question and answer interface on the WebEx. Let's see, okay, first question we have here. If we are already in a contract for Category 1 Internet services, is it still possible to apply for E-rate? So my assumption is that you didn't do a Form 470 for whenever this contract came into play and align it with the E-rate rules that we have at this point. So I'll let Rachel kind of start us off with a response to that.
So typically, if you're trying to roll a contract into the E-rate program, but it didn't initially go through an E-rate bidding process, the option you have is you have to post a Form 470 to competitively bid for that service. You can use your existing contract as a bid response. But what I have to bring to your attention is if somebody else comes in with a better bid response, then you end up in a little bit of a quandary. It may not be your guarantee for rolling it into E-rate, but that is the option you have for doing so. You still have to go through the bid evaluation matrix and everything else using your existing contract as a bid response.
Yeah, and as again, Rachel mentioned, you do run the risk that you may have to pick another vendor. So I'd say look closely at the terms and conditions of your existing contract, and communicate with your current incumbent vendor, letting them know that you do need those discounts to continue on, and just make sure that you have a good understanding of the contract. Okay, hopefully I answered. If not, you can follow back up with another question. And here's another question. We currently are on CalNet 2, getting ready to switch to CalNet 3, but may experience some delay needing to go to council. Let me just make sure I got all of this, because CalNet 3 actually ended on June of this past year. So functionally, it ended on June 30th.
So, Deborah, are you also asking about the extension? Can we review the extension discussion again as it's related to CalNet 3? Is that what I'm understanding the question to be?
Yeah, because last year, and I think we still have it, we actually discussed, we had a video, I think it was in January, we talked about the transition. So, okay. So, yeah, you should have already transitioned to CalNet 3. And when we initially did almost a year ago, the first video webinar, we were checking to see if we could do an extension, but at that point the FCC basically came back to us and said no. So you needed to transition to CalNet 3, and most districts did it, and I'm not sure, maybe some libraries also, effective of June 1st, because the ATO that they had in place probably for the CalNet 3 was going to start on May 15th. And so a lot of the school districts then started it effective the first of the month. So they would have had been on CalNet 3 starting June 1st of 2014. So at this point, from an E-rate perspective, CalNet 2 pretty much expired on June 1st of last year.
The only other caveat to that is if you happen to sign a bridging agreement with AT&T, you basically extended your CalNet 2 pricing, but it's not a CalNet 2 contract. For some, that may be why they're not on CalNet 3 yet. So as Russ mentioned, there really are no more extensions for CalNet 2, but in your transition to CalNet 3, there may be viable reasons why you're not on it yet. Like you said, you have to go to council. I understand libraries, you know, they don't have the ability to sign contracts maybe as readily as school districts do because of having to go to council. But perhaps if we didn't answer your question, maybe you could email us more specifics.
Okay, I got another question over here. Do I need to file Form 470 for month-to-month telephone service or cell service? Yes, you do. And you need to be open to both contracts as well as month-to-month, not just specifically state you would like a month-to-month unless you're only looking for E-rate discounts for a few months into that next year. Okay, and then another question is, do I need to do a Form 470 for data lines? If last year we signed a multi-year contract with our vendor, we may go to a higher speed. I'm not sure yet. And I think that ties back to the other question that we had that's very much an overlap.
So the questions I would have on that is, on your initial multi-year contract, did you do it within the E-rate process? If you did, then you don't necessarily need to do a new Form 470. But if you're planning on increasing the speed based on that same contract, what USAC has shared with us is that your contract must state the speed options as well as the speed prices, and you would have to have had requested that during the bidding process. So all that has to happen first before you can just simply increase the speed on an existing contract.
And what you mean by that is your Form 470 needed to say those specific speeds or your RFP, or you could have said up to 1 gig, and then let's say you started with 100 meg and you want to go to 200 meg, as long as those other factors that Rachel mentioned, that your contract had those quotes of those different speeds on it, as well as your Form 470/RFP stated those opportunities or the need to maybe go to higher bandwidths.
So since those things were not in the contract or RFP, now what do we do?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes there's answers that I don't like to give, and there's answers that are easier to swallow. If those things are not in it, then you're going to have to look at the option of breaking your contract with your vendor. And like Rachel was describing earlier, you could post a Form 470 for those higher bandwidths, and maybe the incumbent would respond to it and would win, and then there's less issues. But I think explaining that to your current vendor that you do need higher bandwidths, but you didn't align it with the E-rate, letting them know that ahead of time. And hopefully they understand that, and they'll allow you to get out of it. If there's some other more specific questions that come up, again, Rachel mentioned you could give us an email or a call, and we can try to help walk you through that. Yeah, that's not the answer I'd like to give you, but unfortunately that's kind of the way the structure and the system and the timing of everything works. Any other questions? Okay, at the end we'll open up the phone bridge for any questions, and then we'll end. So we only have, again, 2 more sections. We'll go through the 471 overview and then CTF, and then we'll open up the phone bridge as well as the chat.
So looking at the E-rate process this year, really the only thing that hasn't had much change at all was the bidding process. We just went over that in quite a bit of detail. It can be daunting for those of you who are new to E-rate, but once you have a cycle under your belt, then you'll see how the whole program kind of flows together. Rest assured, the bidding process is by far the most intense process of the program. After that, it's making sure that you meet deadlines, you follow the forms, and you follow other rules that aren't nearly as heavy as all the rules involved in bidding, yet they're still weighty in the sense that they can affect your funding. So having said that, let's just take a look at some of the things we're going to see on the Form 471. Now remember, we mentioned that the SLD and USAC has created a whole new Form 471. Unfortunately, it isn't available yet for us to demonstrate it for you. But just know that you're probably, even if you are a longtime E-rate person, you're going to have that learning curve this year on using the new Form 471. So it's another reason we encourage you not to wait till the last minute. But here's just a brief list of things that you can do to start preparing for that form when it does become available. Gathering some data in advance. What are all of your entity numbers? This would be both for your lead agency, for your recipients of services, both your schools and libraries, as well as your non-instructional facilities. Schools would need their NCES code. We've provided the link to that website on slide 120, so you can look up your NCES code. If you happen to have a site that does not have a code, you can bypass it in the system and just keep checking back on that site for when you will eventually be assigned a code for each one of your school sites. New this year, you're going to need your CDS code, your state LEA, and school ID number. Now, we have had the question come up that not all schools are assigned that CDS code, so will we be allowed to bypass it in the system? We don't have that answer yet. But since not all schools have that, I would hope that the answer is yes, we can bypass it. You would also want to find out what your Category 2 enrollment is for each school site. And remember, the Category 2 enrollment affects only your Category 2 budget. It does not affect your discount percentage. And then you want to find out what your district-wide NSLP data is, district-wide enrollment, and district-wide how many students qualify for the free and reduced lunch program. Other information that you want to look up in advance, the Urban Rural Lookup tool is released, so you can easily go online right now and get all the data on whether or not you're an urban or rural district. There's some new network information survey on the forms. They're going to want to look at your local area network speed, what type of broadband lines do you have, what is your speed per 1,000 students. Also budget information. This is the budget that demonstrates that you have sufficient resources to cover resources that are not discounted by E-rate. such as your electrical needs, your staff development, software, computers. You're paying for internet access, so you have computers to actually use the internet access. So things like that. That's what sort of budget information this is looking for. And they're looking for a general idea. Granted, we're applying in advance of the funding year, so it may not be possible to know exactly what next year's budget is, but for some of you it might be possible. Whatever you choose to put in this field, make sure you can trace it back to a reasonable place in your actual GL codes and your budget. Now moving on through the Form 471, what we showed you up to this point is just the beginning of the form. Now when we actually start looking at funding requests, there's specific data that you will need in order to enter the information. Remembering that each funding request, you're actually asking for money. So where do you come up with the dollar amount for that money that you're asking for? That's where you'll need perhaps a sample of a bill if it's for month-to-month services. Even if it's contracted services, a sample of the bill might be appropriate. In other instances, the actual copy of the contract would be more appropriate, like say for internet access. You would want to have the contract award date as well as the contract expiration date. And in looking at the expiration date, you'd want to include any extensions that are available to you. And slide 124 highlights the charges again that we'd want to specify on the Form 471. What are the monthly recurring costs? Now, remember, you need to identify the recurring costs that are eligible. It was mentioned earlier during the eligible services discussion how there's many smaller components to your telephone bill now that are not going to be eligible. You'll need to cost allocate those out. And since they're newly not eligible, it's recommended that you show on your actual Form 471 that you have identified and removed those charges by inserting it in the ineligible section of the form. Again, document how you came up with that figure, whether it be through a sample bill that you're going to keep set aside for your E-rate file, or if it's on the actual contract where you can highlight this part is ineligible, and so that when it comes to the PIA review, you'll be ready to answer the questions when they come your way. Now, a couple of different ways that you can show what your annual cost would be. You can take the contract cost, so that's an easy one if you have an annual contract. If it's your, say, your phone bill or any other month-to-month service, you can provide a sample month, or you can average all of your months to find out what your average monthly bill is. Whatever direction you choose to go, again, document how you came up with that figure. Some reminders on your Category 2 funding request. Each site has its own budget. Schools based on total enrollment, including your part-time students. Libraries based on square footage. Possible strategy, there's been a lot of questions on how to actually get through the Category 2 part. You might want to do a separate RFP for each site, but for some of you that may be way too much work. So you do one RFP, but then request to have responses by site. Those are just a couple of options. At any rate, your item 21 upload attachment, which is now part of the form, part of filing online, it's supposed to allow you to be able to divide your bid response or your contract based on location. These are the things that we've been assured will be available to us, and I'm sure many of you are anxious to get your hands on that new form, as are we, in order to be able to know that we'll get through this cycle and know how to use those forms appropriately. Slide 126 and then a couple of slides after that actually gives you some sample of specific data that's going to be requested on the Form 471 this year that has not been requested in the past. And keeping in mind that it's the FCC's goal that all sites have high-speed internet, it's going to be required that you fill these in. They're going to use this information in order to judge whether or not the program is meeting its goals. We want to make sure that E-rate continues to be effective for school districts, so we encourage you to put in useful data when filling out this section. Slide 127, again, new information on wide area networking. And then on slide 128 is if you don't have sufficient local area network or wireless local area network, what's the reason? It brings us to the end of our discussion for the Form 471. Again, we're going to have more thorough training on the Form 471. That training begins on January 15th, and you can find the registration for those trainings on the k12hsn.org website. And on the left side of the screen, you'll click on E-rate and CTF training. You'll also find this recording. We'll have it up there in a couple of days once we get it edited for any lapse of time, for example, our break, but we'll have this recording up there for you so that you can review it at any time you need to. And then just as a quick reminder, again, we also have the video of the Form 470 is available now on the website, and you can choose to look at that. So in just a moment, we'll go into the next section. Do we have any questions, again, on the process of bidding or what you're looking forward to on the Form 471?
Okay, this is our last section here on slide 129, California Teleconnect Fund, known as CTF. So just kind of first a brief overview for I guess there's a few people here that are new to CTF. California Teleconnect Fund is a state-level discount program similar to E-rate in the fact that it does discounts on your Category 1, your telecommunication services. Historically, but very much less complex. There's a single form you fill out, and it's located on the CPUC website. And then once you fill out that form, you get a CTF number, and then every time you order a line, you tell the service provider, and I would encourage you to document it in an email, that you would like to receive CTF discounts. The other factor is that because this is a state-funded program, we do require, CTF does require that E-rate be applied for, and that E-rate discounts come first, and that CTF is after E-rate. So that's kind of a brief overview. I've personally been chairing the California Teleconnect Fund for about 7 to 8 years now, and been part of that committee for a little over 10. So annually, there's a budget that we develop in conjunction with the PUC staff and give them advisements, and that's kind of the role of that committee. So as we look on slide 130, one thing that was happening last winter/spring was that the California Public Utilities Commission was kind of doing a similar thing as what E-rate did, which was reevaluate their programs, just making sure that the programs were meeting the public's needs and they were keeping up with the times, so to speak. CTF did the same thing, and then the PUC staff came out with a proposal last May. And remember, at that point, the E-rate changes had not been codified or solidified until July. So here's kind of an overview of what the proposal for the PUC staff was relative to their program. So one thing they did say was for schools and libraries have voice and VoIP mirror E-rate, keep schools at a 50% discount, and that's because they were talking about proposals for changing other beneficiaries for CTF. The CTF is a benefit to not only schools and libraries, but also for community-based organizations and nonprofit healthcare. The other part of it was a moratorium on CTF applications because they felt like with all these changes that they wouldn't be able to process new applications, and eliminate support entirely for nonprofit private schools that have less than a 40% free use. So again, this was just the proposal. So at this point, oops, I'm sorry, go back one slide. So at this point in time, I had the opportunity with the committee to meet with Commissioner Peterman. She's overseeing the process, and she gave a general overview of that the time frame will probably be sometime at the end of the first quarter of this year, this new year, or the second quarter. So sometime in the next 4 to 6 months. I know myself and others had made very vocal that they'd like to see the continued 50% even without E-rate, because if we look at the first bullet point, if they mirror E-rate, that means that E-rate will be fading out VoIP and voice discounts. So theoretically, the CTF could do the same thing. However, there's been enough public input. I know that there was a public hearing in Sacramento and one in Long Beach, and there was about 4 to 6 K-12, and then also a significant amount of library that spoke up to say to keep the 50% discount in place even with E-rate phasing down. However, I can't say for certain that that's what the outcome is going to be. So that one, I guess, is a stay tuned, and we'll have more information again in the next 4 to 6 months. However, this year will remain the same in terms of the way your 50% after E-rate works. So that's kind of more of a CTF update. We do have, if you're new to CTF, we do have a PowerPoint that shows you how to fill out the application, as well as you can call my office, and either Cindy, myself, or Rachel can help you fill out that application. We will be starting some outreach here in the next month for schools, public schools that haven't applied for CTF, just to make sure we help them. But anyone, you're welcome, if you're even a private or charter, to give us a call and we can help you with that form. Our number is 530-532-5678. And on the last slide here, for the libraries, and again, I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation today, we had a focus group, and Jared Keller from the State Library is part of that focus group and has helped develop this content and information. We also have Doris, Stephen from the Department of Ed, and also Joe that works with her there that's part of our focus group, and then myself and Rachel. There's also a significant amount of other volunteers from a couple of consulting groups that are part of our face-to-face trainings that have been a great help and tremendous help over the years of helping us with this. So this kind of gives you an idea of the CTF. At this point, we'll wrap up and we'll take any chat or question and answers through the webinar, and then we'll open up the phone bridge. And then we just had a question that says, if I came in late into the webinar, is there a link? Yeah, as soon as we get done with today, we're going to try to edit it, so that we might need a couple of days. We're going to edit out the non-muted people and then the break that we had. So we should have it up on our website, I'd hope by the end of the week. So our number in our office is 530-532-5678. So Elton, you can give us a call, and we'll try to have it available by the end of the week. But this is the last beginner training that we're doing, and then the next ones you'll see on our website is going to be the 471 process that Rachel just went over. Okay, well, we don't want to eat up any more of your time. We appreciate everyone's time and attention on this. I know you have, this is something on top of your regular work, and the link to the training materials is on our website also. Basically, where you go to sign up, it says either training materials or sign up. So we'll go ahead and mute everyone again, and don't forget to sign up for the next step, which is the 471. And that's it. And we're going to send out a questionnaire, so please do take the few minutes that will come out this afternoon to help us do a better job in terms of our overall webinars. We plan to schedule more webinars that are ad hoc and do those in the future. So thanks, everyone, for your time.
I'll post the link to the training materials so you can all have them.
Yeah, we'll send that out here. Just give us a second here. We'll send it out through the chat. You'll see that in the chat. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time.